The rain was relentless, hammering against the cracked pavement like 1,000 tiny fists. The city's neon lights flickered weakly through the downpour, casting an eerie glow over the deserted alleyways. It was one of those nights where even the rats stayed indoors, and the only sound was the distant rumble of thunder echoing off the concrete jungle. But for Jake Harper, the storm outside mirrored the chaos inside him. He leaned against the cold brick wall of a crumbling building, his breath visible in the frosty air as he clutched a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey. His once imposing frame, honed by years of military training, was now gaunt, his face shadowed with exhaustion and regret. The scars on his knuckles told stories of battles fought both abroad and within himself. Jake had been a soldier once, a decorated one at that, but war doesn't just leave you when you hang up your uniform. It lingers in your bones, whispering cruel reminders of what you've lost. For Jake, those whispers had grown into deafening screams. After his discharge, the world he returned to felt alien, indifferent to the sacrifices he'd made. Jobs were scarce, friends fewer still, and every day seemed to drag him deeper into a pit of despair. Yet tonight, something about the storm stirred a flicker of defiance in him, a stubborn refusal to let the darkness consume him entirely. It was then that he heard it, a sharp cry cutting through the rain-soaked silence. At first, he thought it might be his imagination, but the sound came again, sharper this time, tinged with desperation. Without hesitation, Jake pushed himself off the wall, his instincts kicking in despite the haze of alcohol clouding his mind. Years of combat training had drilled one truth into him: when someone is in trouble, you act. No questions asked. He moved quickly, his boots splashing through puddles as he rounded the corner into a narrow alley. What he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. 3 men loomed over a young woman pressed against the wall, their faces twisted with malice. One of them held her wrist in a vice-like grip, while another rifled through her bag with greedy hands. Her wide eyes darted frantically, searching for escape, but there was none. She was trapped. Jake's heart clenched, not out of fear but out of fury. This wasn't some random act of violence, it was calculated, cruel, and it ignited a fire in him that had long been smoldering. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The rain continued its relentless assault, blending with the woman's muffled pleas. Then Jake stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Let her go." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of authority, the kind that comes from commanding troops under fire. The thugs turned to face him, their sneers faltering slightly at the sight of his imposing figure. They didn't know who he was or what he'd done, but they could feel it, the quiet danger radiating off him like heat from coals. Breathing hard, Jake turned to the woman. She was trembling, her soaked clothes clinging to her slender frame. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, but her gaze met his with a strength that surprised him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his tone softer now, though still edged with urgency. She shook her head, clutching her bag tightly to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Jake nodded, unsure of what to say next. He hadn't expected gratitude, he'd simply done what he believed was right. But as he looked at her, standing there fragile yet resilient, he felt something stir within him, a spark of hope, perhaps, or maybe just the faintest glimmer of redemption. As Jake stood there, drenched and panting, the adrenaline began to ebb away, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. The woman before him, though visibly shaken, exuded a quiet resilience that intrigued him. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned him with an intensity that belied her petite stature. There was something about her demeanor, calm under pressure, that hinted at depths far greater than her outward appearance suggested. Jake found himself studying her more closely, noting the subtle firmness in her stance and the controlled steadiness of her breathing, which spoke volumes of someone accustomed to handling crises. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice steady despite the tremors still coursing through her body. Jake shrugged, trying to play down the heroics. "Just a guy passing by," he replied, his tone deliberately casual. Yet he couldn't shake off the feeling that this encounter was anything but ordinary. The way she scrutinized him, almost as if peeling back layers to uncover truths hidden beneath his rugged exterior, made him uneasy yet oddly respected. Her next question caught him off guard. "Why did you help me?" It was direct, piercing, and loaded with implications. Jake paused, the weight of her inquiry pressing down on him. He had acted on instinct, driven by a moral compass that refused to let injustice prevail. But explaining that to someone who possibly lived a life shrouded in secrecy and strategy was daunting. I couldn't just stand by, he admitted, his voice tinged with sincerity. No one deserves to be treated like that. She nodded slowly, as if weighing his response. Then, with a flicker of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she extended her hand. My name's Elena, she said, her grip firm and confident. And I owe you my life. Jake shook her hand, feeling a strange kinship forming between them in that brief exchange. He sensed a shared understanding, a mutual recognition of battles fought and survived. Elena's poise was remarkable. Despite the harrowing ordeal, she maintained an air of composed dignity. Her eyes, however, betrayed a simmering anger and a steely determination that intrigued Jake. As they stood there amidst the remnants of the storm, a silent pact seemed to form between them. Jake really. Their interaction was brief yet profound, filled with unspoken acknowledgments and burgeoning respect. Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose stirring within him, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his days in the military. Here was someone who understood the language of courage and sacrifice, someone who could appreciate the gravity of his actions without needing explanations. As they parted ways, Jake couldn't help but feel that this chance meeting was the beginning of something significant, a turning point that might just steer his life back onto a path of meaning and direction. The atmosphere shifted subtly as Elena led Jake through a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, each step resonating with an ominous echo. The walls, lined with steel and surveillance equipment, gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, revealing a stark contrast to the chaotic streets they had left behind. Jake's senses were on high alert, his military-trained instincts picking up on the subtle nuances of security protocols embedded in the architecture around him. Every door they passed was reinforced, every corner monitored by cameras that swiveled with mechanical precision. This was no ordinary hideout, it was a fortress. Elena walked with purpose, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor, a sound that seemed to punctuate the tension in the air. She glanced back occasionally, ensuring Jake followed closely, her expression unreadable yet reassuring. You're safe here, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried a weight of authority that silenced any doubts Jake might have harbored. He nodded, though his eyes continued to scan their surroundings, cataloging every detail, every potential threat. They reached a heavy steel door, which slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room bathed in the warm glow of ambient lighting. Inside, a group of individuals sat around a large oval table, their faces illuminated by holographic displays hovering above its surface. The room buzzed with quiet efficiency, each person engrossed in their tasks yet acutely aware of the newcomer's presence. Elena gestured for Jake to enter, her hand brushing lightly against his arm, a gesture of reassurance that sent a ripple of calm through his tense muscles. Welcome to the core of our operations, Elena announced, her voice now clear and commanding, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The team members looked up, their expressions ranging from curiosity to cautious appraisal. Jake felt the weight of their gazes, each pair of eyes assessing him, probing for weakness or strengths. He straightened his posture, meeting their scrutiny with a steady gaze, his military bearing lending him an air of confidence that belied his inner turmoil. This is Jake Harper, Elena continued, her tone imbued with a respect that piqued the interest of her colleagues. He saved my life tonight, displaying a level of skill and bravery that few possess. Her words hung in tea. The room fell silent, the significance of her statement sinking in. Jake felt a surge of pride mingled with unease. He was used to anonymity, not accolades. One of the operatives, a tall man with sharp features and an air of seasoned authority, stood up and approached Jake. We don't take risks lightly, he said, extending a hand. But Elena's endorsement carries weight. Welcome aboard, soldier. His handshake was firm, his eyes locking on Jake's with a penetrating intensity that spoke of years spent in covert operations. Jake nodded, acknowledging the gesture, his mind racing with questions about the nature of this organization and his unexpected role within it. As introductions continued, Jake absorbed snippets of conversation, piecing together fragments of information about the group's mission. They were a clandestine unit, operating beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement, dedicated to dismantling networks of crime and corruption that plagued the city. Each member brought a unique set of skills to the table, tech specialists, strategists, field agents, all united by a common goal. Jake felt a kinship with these individuals, recognizing in them the same drive that had once fueled his military career. The tour concluded with a visit to the command center, a hive of activity where real-time data streams painted a vivid picture of ongoing operations. Screens displayed maps dotted with markers, communications crackled through headsets, and analysts worked tirelessly, their fingers flying over keyboards. Jake watched, mesmerized by the orchestrated chaos, a symphony of coordinated efforts aimed at tipping the scales toward justice. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, drawing his attention back to her. "This is where we make a difference," she said, her eyes reflecting a fierce determination. "And you, Jake, have already proven yourself invaluable. We could use someone like you." Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord within him that had long been silent. For the first time in years, Jake felt a sense of belonging, a purpose that transcended his personal struggles. As they stood there, surrounded by the hum of relentless pursuit, Jake knew he had found a new battlefield, one where his skills and experiences could forge a path to redemption. The room fell silent as Elena gestured for Jake to take a seat at the head of the oval table, her movements deliberate yet graceful. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, the air thick with anticipation. He sank into the chair, his eyes scanning the faces around him, faces that now regarded him not just as a rescuer but as a potential ally. Elena stood beside him, her presence commanding yet reassuring, her gaze steady as she addressed the group. "Jake Harper isn't just a man who saved my life tonight," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to leadership. "He's a soldier, a protector, and someone who understands the cost of sacrifice. And now, he has a choice to